Доброго вечора, ми з України.
My name is Teddy Verona. I'm from the United States, but I reside permanently in Mexico. I came here to join the American Foreign Legion. I joined Zelensky's call for Friends of Ukraine to come help in the situation that Ukraine finds itself in.
Teddy, was there one moment when you said, like, you were sitting back home and you said, okay, I need to go, I got to book this ticket to get to Ukraine? What was the thing that pushed you to do it?
I work in the finance department for a development company, develops resorts in Mexico, and I realized that there was no way I could stay and not do anything when I couldn't finish a basic spreadsheet. As someone who does finance a lot, I just graduated grad school. Spreadsheets are something you do consistently all day, and efficiency is the name of the game. And I couldn't get through some of the most basic sheets, but
Because you were so
focused on what was happening, and I couldn't enjoy myself. I love where I live. I live in, and it's a wonderful place to live. But I couldn't enjoy anything. I couldn't enjoy going to mass. I couldn't enjoy eating well or having a drink, while I knew that there was a beleaguered nation, a sovereign nation that's been bullied and harassed for decades at this point. One that has been let down or at least poorly served by many of its allies. And I take a small piece of responsibility for that as a member of Western civilization.
And you came to Ukraine before the war.
Yes, sir.
And what is your sense of what, I think so much of the world now sees the bad footage, the horrible scenes from Ukraine. How would you describe what Ukraine is and what it was before the war?
I find the Ukrainians to be a deeply realistic and pragmatic people. There's a false conception out there that somehow they've been radicalized or that there's an extreme element coming out of Ukraine. I haven't noticed that at all. In fact, what the average Ukrainian seems to be calling for are basic principles in the community of civilized nations, the most basic of rights, such as self-determination. There's much debate between the Ukrainians I've met about where to go with their self-determination, as there is in every other country. But the baseline level of being able to determine their own fate is something that they're demanding, and one that's being denied from them by a expansionist imperialist power to its east.
And so to briefly summarize, I mean, you've had significant experience in the U.S. military as a Marine.
Yes, sir.
And so you were in Afghanistan, and I don't know how much you can say about any of that.
Yes,
but
sir.
you came here, you had experience, and you said, I need to use this experience here to help.
Yes, sir.
Ukraine. Yeah.
I fought in Afghanistan in 2010 in Helmand Province with the United States Marine Corps in the infantry. At the time, I considered my deployment to be pretty rough. By relative to other Afghan deployments, it was rough. I have to admit, nothing prepared me. Even for 5 years of training and deployments, nothing prepared me for for my brief time here and on the front in Ukraine. Nothing prepared me for that. Yeah.
Well, when we talked this morning, you explained how. And maybe this is a segue into you speaking about your experience when you've been north of Kyiv,
Yes.
where there's been intense fighting for the past week, and Kyiv, the city, is held, but
Yes,
the
sir.
fighting is starting maybe 15 miles outside of the city.
Yes, sir.
And you have been, and you maybe this is the segue to give people the sense of what's happening there and the seriousness of it.
Yes, sir.
But this morning you said to me, the bravery of the Ukrainians is the likes of which you've never seen and which you only
Sure.
had read, say, in Kipling or Hemingway.
Yes, sir.
And so can you maybe starting by talking about that bravery, but can you take us into what has it been like in those trenches?
Yes, sir. Well, you mentioned some classic authors. The bravery that I've seen, I've only read in history books. I've the closest thing I think, the reaction to 9/11, many of the first responders in terms of pure bravery, it's beyond description. And it's not exaggerated to say that the Ukrainian forces are facing overwhelming odds, both numerically, with equipment, and the degree of pernicious preparation on the part of Russian forces. It's shocking how brave. In the face of just such overwhelming odds, they seem to be completely resolute to standing tall and standing firm and not giving an inch of ground. I'm in awe of the average Ukrainian soldier, and I won't sugarcoat it. Many of them have only had 2 weeks of training in some cases. That's anecdotal, incidentally. 2 weeks of training, horribly under-equipped, freezing, and have every reason to break in front of the enemy and simply won't. I'm convinced that the position I was in, I can't get into specifics, but I'm convinced that the Ukrainians would have to be overrun through bayonet and club before they would ever leave their positions. It's truly the epitome of one side fighting for an ideal and principle and the other not. What it will show you that it doesn't matter in terms of equipment, training, preparation. When one side has a reason to stand and fight to the end, they'll do it and they'll make an account for themselves. Whereas I feel like our enemy simply doesn't have a reason to continue fighting. They're just going to throw as much weight as possible at the situation.
Well, and earlier you described to me the sense that, the Ukrainians know that if they even lose a few feet, it's back closer to their home, to Kyiv.
Yes.
You feel this from their spirit and from their conversations?
Desperation, it has a negative connotation to it, but they know what's at stake. They know that every inch of ground is one in which you call it hyperbolic. A barbarian horde is closer to their family, and you can see it in their face. I had the distinction of meeting one Ukrainian soldier, just a private who he didn't get into too many details, but had already lost all of his family in a bombing. I don't know any more details specific to that, but I can't imagine even being able to function as an adult had something like that happen, and yet here he was in a trench line, maintaining military bearing, composure, and continuing to fight. They know what's at stake. What's a tragedy of the whole thing in the grand scheme of humanity is that the average Russian soldier has nothing to gain and everything to lose in this conflict, and so it's when you're there, it's difficult to comprehend exactly what could be their motivation other than a slave driver behind them, cracking a whip.
And what I don't know if you can say anything about this, but what can you say about you've been close to the Russian soldiers. What is your sense of their morale, of who they are, and how the Russians are treating each other?
Well, at the time, it's hard to make kind of an immediate analysis of your enemy's disposition because you're very afraid. But in retrospect, I would say that they're very afraid, tactically inept, unaware, and it seemed like they were just driven, like I said, driven forward by some like proverbial master, pushing them forward. I thought about it. If they did overrun our position, if we broke or ran or anything like that, I can't imagine how demoralizing it would be for them to say, great, we captured a handful of lousy trenches and now we just have one more 500 meters down the road, down the tree line. We will have another set of trench lines to take. Because it doesn't look like the Ukrainians are going to give a single inch.
What do you think Ukrainians, and I think you might know better than most, certainly as among English speakers, what do Ukrainians need most right now, right there in those moments when they're fighting, where they actually are fighting this war?
I would like to say this first. I don't have any knowledge on top-down issues, so I don't want to overstep my my bounds, but from what my immediate field of view is, they need a little bit of everything. Often people make the mistake of saying, all right, well, let's just flood it with military equipment. But, a big part of surviving in a combat situation is simply your gear to keep yourself alive and in a degree of comfort. Being just uncomfortable all the time it can be enough to almost break a unit. So everything ranging from sleeping bags, cold weather gear, gloves, socks. Again, like a thing that shocked me about how resolute and tough Ukrainians are is that I would see men that had feet that were in horrible condition. We're talking World War I era-esque type trench foot. And I asked a basic question for the Marines: hey, have you changed your socks? And the response I get was, what socks? They're lacking on everything. It appears to me, in my field of view, no higher level of bird's eye view on this, that it's trench warfare, World War I, with a splash of advanced technology, and also giant gaps in pretty standard basic technology. If I must get specific, there was a conspicuous absence of handheld mortar systems. 60 millimeter mortars would have made a lot of difference. Basic communication tools, which was a big problem for us. I'd say it was a crucial problem for us. Basic communication tools, things as simple as a lensatic compass for your commanders to have, any kind of drone technology that could match the Russians. I'm a mortarman, so partially I really do think that some indirect fire handheld systems especially would have really made the difference in the fighting itself. But the Ukrainians seem to make do with whatever shortage they have. When I talk about overwhelming odds, this isn't the Ukrainians didn't seem to be, and the American foreigners, that's important to note, didn't seem to be just content with sitting in a trench and repulsing attack after attack. The Ukrainians launched attacks of well-equipped, in some cases, well-equipped Russians, and numerically vastly superior. Lacking all the equipment that I just described too, they were still launching attacks. For me, it was inconceivable. And the Ukrainians were kind to me and some of the other foreigners by saying you didn't have to go on a lot of these assaults. But we're talking about a guy who didn't have a pair of socks, who would go on assault teams to try and battle over a small area of land from the Russians. And it's just inspiring. I'm never going to forget it, and I'm going to go back to my veteran friends in the United States and tell their story. And anytime I hear a Marine talk about being afraid on a battlefield in some future conflict, I'm going to tell them, remember the Ukrainians. They were afraid too, but they held their ground.
And you do plan to go back. What would you say as maybe an appeal to other people around the world to come here, or to governments? Why you said why this matters for you.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit why you think this is important for anyone else and for the world?
I think that if Ukraine is allowed to fall victim to a predatory nation that refuses to join the international community of nations like Russia, then that idea will spread elsewhere, that predatory nations can get away with this, can bully and harass sovereign nations, annex pieces of it. If I think the West, I don't speak for any government. This is entirely my own opinion, but I think the West has been complacent in the face of aggression. I think that there's been a misapplied trust in the world, that we've moved, that nations couldn't be predatory at this point, that we've moved past some degree of imperialism and aggression from other nations. I mean, it was so obvious that Putin was willing and ready to do this. He'd done it before with Georgia, that it shocked me that the world was surprised when this occurred. And it's because as if the West believes that somehow everyone around the globe has evolved past the idea of conquest. So what's essential is if we don't make a stand now, every tyrant, as petty as they are, like Putin, will get the idea that suddenly smaller nations, neighboring nations, they'll be for the bloc. Ukraine is gonna remain the hero, not just for Ukraine but for the world, saying that the secondary countries, not first superpowers, can stand up. And not only stand up, but put the rest of the world to shame if we don't stand with them. And right now, the West needs to have the political and the moral resolve to continue this, to continue to aid Ukraine. The idea that right now the West should be afraid of escalation, to me, is it's Winston Churchill said, you can't negotiate with a tiger while your head rests in its mouth. The enemy has already escalated this. We should not back down to the threat of force at this point. I hope that answered your questions. I apologize for being long-winded.
Man, well, I'll tell you, I also wanted to ask, because we had this great conversation this morning, and really eye-opening for me to hear, again, in English, the perspective of what it's like there at the point, like, you're at the front, the actual center point of this whole conflict that the world is watching, eating popcorn, sort of watching this, yes. Right? And you're right there. And so, we've seen so many videos of Russian prisoners of war, for example, here. But even then, there's a video of guys in captivity. So to really understand, like, you're face to face with the Russians. What did you see? What did you hear? What is the real perspective, as you can see, of what this enemy is at that micro level?
Yes. On the micro level, anybody who is under the misconception that the Russians have boast some sort of a juggernaut war machine, the Ukrainians have lethally proved that wrong. We're facing a slave army that is not well trained, that is evidently cannot supply itself well. Their troops are not well equipped. They don't seem very motivated, and shocking for, perhaps there's some cultural precedence for this in Russian history, but shocking for at least any Western military man is the treatment of their dead and their wounded. They make very little effort, almost none. I mean, it's not 100%, but they make very little effort to collect their dead. They will leave their dead where they fall. They will make a half-hearted effort. It's almost a matter of circumstance to help their wounded. This is not some sort of Zhukov 1944 Red Army type of military that they're yielding. It's something darker. It's something less organized, almost desperate. I think Putin's back is to the wall, and he knows it. And the only way that he can solve this situation is by throwing bodies at the wall, at the Ukrainian wall, in the hopes of some sort of a successful, some sort of breakthrough concession given by the West. But on a micro level, if you are the type of person that would be interested in Russian adventurism and military conquest, know this: you will be treated as cannon fodder. If you are wounded, there's a high probability that you will be left to bleed. You are coming up against committed, both foreign and Ukrainian troops who will show you mercy to the extent of the law, but will defend themselves and kill you if you continue to keep trying. That's a message I would like to give to anybody who would think about joining the Russian side on this. You'll be left to bleed out on the street, and nobody will care.
Well, and did you hear the cries of these soldiers as they're dying in the
yes.
field? What was the feel? What was your awareness?
Most of the killed and wounded Russians that you could hear calling for help were more within earshot of our advanced positions. I did hear one individual, but the majority of them were relayed back to me in the trench line from more advanced positions. But we can confirm, my story can be corroborated by many others, that yes, their Russians will be left there yelling until they eventually bleed and die. As a Marine, it's unconscionable to do such a thing. We take pride in not leaving a man behind. Maybe battlefield necessity in the most extreme of cases will leave a body, but never a person who's drawing breath. I don't understand a culture that can produce a military like that. I understand the Russians have a whole history of a depressing history and depressive literature, but I still can't understand a culture that would be able to produce that. How you could watch or listen to your own men die, or send them wave after wave after wave to be cut down by better soldiers and better Marines and better Ukrainians. But yeah, you will be treated, Russians, you will be treated as cattle by your own men.
And if so, given the state of the Russian soldier, and which we've heard about in other reports, and seem to hear sometimes from the soldiers, they capture the ones themselves. Yet Russia is still this existential threat to Ukraine.
Yes.
And so, what is the Russian strength? Is it the sheer number of soldiers? Is it equipment? What is the true source then of the Russian threat?
From an immediate individual perspective, the thing I found most threatening, and many will disagree with me, it's a matter of opinion, is their artillery, the massive amounts of artillery that they have. I'm a mortarman. I feel like I'm a good judge on what is effective indirect fire, and theirs is effective. It's effective. It's guided by drones and fairly effective forward observers, individuals using traditional and non-traditional forms of attack, of indirect fire methods. But to me, it's the indirect fire. With a few changes, I think, in equipment, the Ukrainians could level the playing field dramatically. That being, humbly, as an individual who doesn't speak for the United States Defense Department or NATO, more advanced armor, and more advanced and much more of anti-air defense systems. And I think the Ukrainians would not only halt the Russians, but push them across the border. This isn't a problem of numerical superiority. It's a problem of equipment superiority on the part of the Russians. But even then, on paper, what they have, as an American Marine, I can understand, at least on paper, what a threat is. Even on paper, they're such a paper tiger, and I don't understand why the West isn't able to. A few M1, in my humble opinion, a few Abrams. The military viewers will know what I'm talking about. A few Abrams would be war winning. You give a few Abrams to these committed Ukrainians, and you'll rout tank columns. You'll rout entire tank regiments of Russians with those types of assets. But it seems in my small way, that their tactical go-to is simply to shell everything into obliteration, because they couldn't overrun the Ukrainians, nor the few Americans and Brits that were there, and others et al. With infantry assaults and armor assaults. So they just resorted to launching as much heavy artillery into the position as possible. If that artillery can get neutralized, I can't see what their grand tactical strategy would be.
Great. Teddy, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.